Good to be here. I like this group. Canadian Human Rights Voice obviously talks about the kind of things that I certainly agree with as an activist in Amnesty International. And so I'm pleased to be here once again this year, as last year. And so the other context, of course, is this is the second year in a row where CHRV has focused on women's issues, which is so important, obviously. I needn't argue that, I trust. And yet, as you all know, women still face such extensive discrimination, including some of the horrific things we just heard, actually, around the world, in all sorts of different countries, every country in the world, that this kind of discussion is still really important. The other piece of good news I can say is, I'm going to speak briefly, and the other more educated, more knowledgeable speakers perhaps, I'll just mention a few things in regard to Sri Lanka. I serve as the coordinator for Amnesty International, focusing on Sri Lanka, and part of the reason that I'm speaking a bit briefly, more briefly, today than the other women, is that the situation in Sri Lanka is rather uncertain right now. It's uncertain not because of human rights violations still occurring there, unfortunately, but because the resolution of those human rights violations, and hopefully a better society in Sri Lanka very soon, is uncertain because of the recent election. A new president was elected in Sri Lanka on January 8th, just a couple of months ago. And that's a huge difference in Sri Lanka because of their system of government where the executive president, that's the name, is more powerful than most leaders of countries, and hence got a whole new cabinet too. It's a whole new political situation in Sri Lanka, and uncertain about just where the country will go. I also wanted to talk about the United Nations in respect of the United Nations' important role in regard to trying to resolve some of the problems in Sri Lanka, including women's concerns, because the UN Human Rights Council actually is meeting presently, as of last Monday, in Geneva, and Sri Lanka was supposed to be discussed there at this meeting during this month, and very specifically, an important report on human rights violations in Sri Lanka was supposed to be made public this month, from which changes and improvements might be able to be made. However, because of the new president and the election of a new government, in effect, the Sri Lankan government, in effect, successfully argued to the UN Human Rights Commissioner at the UN level that the report should be delayed. And so the Human Rights Council actually agreed that there be a 6-month delay before the issuance of this report, with mixed feelings. Everybody really qualified what they were saying. But they thought the negative side, affecting Tamils particularly, because it was Tamils more than the majority Sinhalese who suffered, during the war, and still have human rights violations occurring against them, and Tamil women suffering still, with not enough being done. Still, the decision by enough people was that the benefits would probably be sufficient with this new government trying to do what they can, that it was worth postponing. And one brief anecdote is that it's amusing in the English language press in Sri Lanka, which I read in a dedicated way every day. I noticed that a former president, the significant president who was a woman actually, in Sri Lanka, was key, and is attributed to being key in electing this guy as the new president, showing her power actually and influence, which is interesting. And the note in part, just to explain just a little of her motivation, is that she happens to be the daughter of the woman who became the first woman leader in the world. In 1960, she won election as, I think it was called Prime Minister at the time, because the Constitution has been changed, and so there's a president now in charge. But I think it was Prime Minister. Her mother was elected as leader, the first woman ever elected as leader in the entire world. And so Sri Lanka has that in its history. And in my visits to Sri Lanka, I've had the pleasure of being there actually 10 times over 30 years or so. And women, in particular, are still excited by the fact that Sri Lanka showed that leadership. There's another heck of a lot of work to be done to make sure women face equal rights, too. But however, that's just a particular note that is stimulating and fun and inspiring for women still in Sri Lanka. And so it's delightful as a human rights activist to go there and as a male identify with women trying to help women in Sri Lanka. I speak for just 1 second on amnesty, just because since the situation of the Human Rights Council of the UN is uncertain right now, Amnesty has made a couple of strong statements arguing that, quote, Sri Lanka victims of human rights violations deserve truth and justice, unquote. And it has expanded that to explain that the delay of this report by 6 months does not mean that the Human Rights Council and the countries around the world of interest to Sri Lanka and trying to help Sri Lanka should cease its efforts. That more effort actually needs to be done so that women's rights and human rights in general actually be improved by the time that this report is issued in September of this year. So Amnesty is arguing strongly that be done, and there are other things that it's arguing, but that's the essence of the argument. When I speak about a couple of particular issues, violence against women is a key one, unfortunately, that still occurs there. Interestingly, a former president of Sri Lanka, and now the current, I don't know what he's doing, it's Ranil Wickremesinghe, and I forget his exact position with the government, but anyway, he's key. He plays an important role as an assistant advisor to the president. And he, in a previous role as a leader of the opposition 2 years ago, set up an independent, they love the word independence, just to show that they're objective and independent and not influenced unfairly, by the government. But the Independent Commission on Prevention of Violence Against Women. So after a couple of years, a report was made in December, actually, and just a couple of statistics are amazing to me. 15% of men, presumably they interviewed, admitted to raping women, to committing rape of women. 15%, jeez, I mean, this is the average population, it's just incredible. 24% admitted to marital rape. And this is just part of the challenge to understand of what women must face. The irony, in part, is that the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act was legislated and adopted in Sri Lanka in 2005. A victory for women, clearly, and seen as such. But after 10 years of being law, research as of when fall of 2013 by a research organization in Sri Lanka estimated, or in fact found out and proved that 1% of women who experience domestic violence actually seek protection under the law, under the act. So in other words, the law is superfluous as far as women making use of it. So what the heck does that mean? What kind of challenge? I mean, to quote another person or use the education word, Lord, at least education is necessary, but a lot more than that is necessary, in addition to political commitment to make it real, for women. A fascinating anecdote that I'll share is that in 1999, I've been coordinator for Sri Lanka for Amnesty for 20 years, actually 22 years or whatever. And Tamils in Canada, in the diaspora here, we're organizing a new group, actually, a diaspora group across the country with people, Tamil members, right across the country. But one of the fascinating workshops I found there was that they were looking at domestic violence. So I was extremely lucky and fortunate because of being from Amnesty, hence being a male at a women's meeting here today. So I was permitted to attend this workshop, actually. I was aware there's 47 people. There were 3 males. I was one, but I was Amnesty, so it's okay that I was there. It was a powerful workshop. Women, Tamils, who immigrated or claimed refugee status and living in Canada talked about rape or domestic violence and how to get around that, how to do education within the diaspora community of Tamil women. And I thought it was just tremendous. 1999, I was really acutely aware as a guy who grew up in Canada in conservative Christian society. This kind of thing isn't talked about at a conference. And boy, I have experienced it certainly. And I thought it was just really, really powerful. And as a male, actually, one of the things that really impressed me, as well as the women who were there, was that the other two men who were there actually were guys who were Tamil and who had married women and who actually admitted before this workshop that they had committed domestic violence, which was powerful, just, you know, for these guys to admit it publicly, but open themselves, and the implication of their wives too, of course, for this kind of personal story was just really powerful. And the discussion was really respectful and tremendous. And just, I wish I could follow through and say, now domestic violence doesn't exist in the Tamil society, and I just don't know what the actual follow through. But I thought it was just a powerful thing for an immigrant and refugee community to discuss openly in Canada. It was just really, really great. And a complete contrast, obviously, to what unfortunately is going on in Sri Lanka right now. So back to Sri Lanka, and I'll just mention quickly one report. Yasmin Sukha is a South African Tamil woman. Don't always associate that, but there are a number of Tamils in South Africa. Powerful woman who has co-authored with two men, one from Indonesia, one from the US, a report to Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the UN, on Sri Lanka. And she organized funding and research for a report that was put out a year ago, last March, 2014, called An Unfinished War. The argument in Sri Lanka is that even though the Sri Lankan security forces and army beat the Tamil Tigers 5 years ago, in fact, Yasmin Sukha argued with her researchers that in fact the unfinished war is the war against women in Sri Lanka. And the horror is it's just still going on. I'm almost in tears, but the violence that women face, the rape, some of the figures that we have heard already, certainly apply to Sri Lanka. The basis of the research were 40 people who had escaped or left Sri Lanka and went to the UK, and lawyers in the UK interviewed these 40 people. And their stories were backed up with legal and medical research, so that it's just an iron-tight argument and case that these people are speaking the truth, and that a lot of work needs to be done. But it's just a powerful thing. I had the pleasure and privilege, too, of moderating a panel at the University of Toronto when Yasmin Sukha was here for 3 days, last April, I guess it was. And I asked her, actually, how about all those widows? Because this war went on for 26 years, for goodness sake. So there's an estimate of something like 80,000 women who are suffering as single mothers or as widows and trying to live their lives. And she too couldn't tell me of a particular strong, well-researched report on that kind of situation, which is really powerful. But it's just an illustration of the kind of challenge that women, you know, have to go through. And this report that Yasmin Sukha did, of course, illustrates that authorities, these people are being raped, according to this report, by police, by army, not just domestic violence. This is government representatives with the security forces who are maligning and abusing and violating women in the country. It's just scandalous, absolutely appalling. Amnesty has done a similar report, and I won't even tell the details. Yasmin Sukha's report is frankly more powerful, even though some of the facts that Amnesty brought out are really good, but Yasmin certainly did it really powerfully. Another just topic, and I know I am out of time. Why don't I just speak briefly about women as migrants. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants, Francois Crépeau, went to Sri Lanka 2 years ago. And he argues strongly for better monitoring of their recruitment industry, and that women from Sri Lanka in particular, who work in the Middle East, because it's just a frequent number of people who go to the Middle East, who go to Malaysia or Japan, and send money back home to look after their families. 1.8 million Sri Lankans are working overseas as of 2 years ago. So that's a pretty up-to-date figure. It's just incredible. But the abuses and the difficulties that they face as women, not just as migrant workers, but as women, is really appalling. Human Rights Watch adds to this in particular. They just put out a report in October 2014, the title being, "I have already bought you quote unquote. In other words, statement of some pig, dare I say, some macho guy in the Middle East, and about abuse and exploitation of female migrant domestic workers in the United Arab Emirates. Excuse me. And so that report details how women are not paid, how they're abused. It's just really bad. Why don't I just finish off by saying just a little bit of hope. The same person to whom I referred earlier, an earlier president, Chandrika Kumartunga, in Sri Lanka. Never did I think I would finish a talk about Sri Lanka and complimenting this former president. But she's a woman who, in many ways, is really dedicated to human rights. And she spoke yesterday, dare I say, International Women's Day in Sri Lanka. Give me just 1 second. She said, literally, all aspects of human life, of societies, of government, have been fashioned to suit this situation of discussion in relation to what was going on, of the male of the species over the female. And then the adjective that was caught by the media was that she said the situation in Sri Lanka in respect of the respect between the genders is putrid. So with that inspiring word to the women to change their society from being a putrid one to being an equal one where human rights of women are recognized, I say, let's get at it from here too. Thank you.